really repeat all more or less the same ideas. We address some thoughts to the panels and or some general ideas. I have a bit of problem that I have to go for an official ceremony for our new rector, as I'm the dean now. So I'm very sorry that I will leave within the very discussion that was not really planned like this. But I hope I see at least some of you tomorrow for the workshop. So, yeah, I would say. Who wants to say a few words first about the first panel? Yeah, Nataliia. So you start, and then I might follow and
first of all,
you quietly.
First of all, I would like to thank you, all of you, for sharing your ideas, for sharing your fears, for sharing your emotions, personal experience. Being a pure historian of early modern times, I've learned personally a lot, and I'm very extremely thankful to all of you. So the first panel, the main idea of this panel was to bring together two different fields, East European studies and peace and conflict studies. And I think this idea, this experiment is in fact very, very fruitful. First of all, we can see, I would like to start with paper of Andreas Sieg, who explained us this global insecurity in German society. Also, several times he and other prelegents were stressing the idea that peace is not relevant for Ukraine anymore. It was relevant before the war started, but the only victory is relevant. And then I know personally that this idea is extremely bad treated from the public in Germany, because this word is even word victory or Sieg in German has a very bad connotations because of obvious historical reason. And here, a paper of Julia Eichenberg, I'm very thankful for this, because you explained it very briefly from why this pacifism is so deeply rooted in the peace and conflict studies, and how actually this peace and conflict studies arose from this pacifism after the Second World War. Actually, Julia also showed that peace and conflict studies was extremely unprepared to the war that had started in Ukraine, and she showed also the shifting and crucial changes in both disciplines because of the war in East European studies and peace and conflict studies after the war in Ukraine. Then the paper of Yevhen Magda, unfortunately he can't hear us anymore, but actually he brought very important issues that are very relevant for us today, I think. First of all, this cultural imperialism. He was talking about also the church issue, the role of the church in Ukrainian society is still enormous and shapes this public debate, at least in Ukraine, to a large scale. Also, this educational issue. Here, I would like to switch to Svetlana's Potapenko paper, and thank you, Svetlana, for your personal observation and that you shared with us your experience that you gathered being in the different conference since the war started. And actually, Svetlana wanted to show the importance of this decolonization approach to Ukrainian history, and me as a historian of pre-modern time, I can only launch to her ideas and say that this pre-modern period is extremely important in formation of Ukrainian identity, and it's still underestimated in German academia. I'll never forget the question about the one professor of pre-modern history from the top excellent German university, who asked me something about Ukraine being a part of Russian state in the 16th century. And actually, I was so astonished, and I was so really astonished by these questions that I couldn't find the appropriate answer. you can't say, professors, you are a very good specialist in American and Latin American, but you know just nothing about Eastern Europe at the same time. That's why I really plead here to treat Ukrainian studies not simply just as Slavic studies. It's not studies about languages, even not about Ukrainian culture. We have to keep in mind that the Ukrainian lands is a kind of really this laboratorium of interconfessional, intercultural history. And this is the area where Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, Jewish, Tatars, and different Karayims, other cultures have been interacting and mutual influencing during at least 6 late centuries. Thank you so much, and I give the word to you.
So thank you very much. So I agree and join you in thanking you all for really mindful and very insightful statements and nice discussions. I really learned a lot. A few comments and statements about this second panel about rethinking Ukraine's past for a common European future. I like that panel very much because for me it has become clear that the statements and discussions showed quite clearly how highly interconnected are the actual debates on Europe's attitude toward the Ukraine with historical processes and the formation of long-lasting imperial and national discourses and patterns of thought. And I should add in this context, with the lack of knowledge, most of the panelists have acknowledged that, with the lack of knowledge of these developments, we have still to face them. And Yoko mentioned in this context the long-lasting formation of Germans and other Europeans, and with their fascination, if not obsession, of Russian culture, which still is obviously a task to work on and to rethink. Looking at these interconnected processes, it reminds me somehow, as we are in Bielefeld, to Kosellecks topos of the Gleichzeitigkeit des Ungleichzeitigen, simultaneity of the non-simultaneous, in the sense that, in fact, processes like of aggressive imperialism in the case of Russia, processes of decolonization and nation building in the case of Ukraine, and a process of, I don't know if that is too much, but of a sort of transnational integration, which has entered a difficult phase of processes of the coming up of new nationalisms and disintegration, not only with the Brexit, in the case of the European Union. So, but I also learned the lesson today that we might be very careful about hierarchies or hierarchizing cultures and powers in this sense. So this approach might be also in a sense to be to be sought very carefully in this sense. A central question, which in a way might summarize our discussions, is how can we succeed in perceiving Ukraine not only as a marginal and deficit part, incomplete country or part of Europe, but as a partner on eye level. And some answers and perspectives have been given during our discussion. So first, the political dimension, so to call it. Benjamin and others mentioned the recent discussions about Ukraine as a candidate or as having the candidate status for the European Union, which might be interpreted basically as a gesture or a gesture in times of war. And at least some of us has pronounced a rather skeptical view whether the European Union is ready for integration of Ukraine. The European Union, and I think that become also clear in the panel, has to be first agree on its basic values. Jurko came up with the term of the Friedensprojekt European Union and the political agenda of the European Union, and accordingly the European Union has to reform itself as a very first step. But there's another element which Katerina and Jurko both mentioned. This is the European idea, which is also of great importance, and probably it might be underestimated in our debates, because somehow in times of Brexit and many national populisms and other movements, we are not aware of this sense and the importance of this very factor of the European idea, or somehow it got lost and should be renewed. My second, the second level is the historical dimension, of course. I do not remember who, but two of you mentioned Mark von Hagen's idea or concept of Ukraine as a laboratory for different experiences, for a cultural crossroads. And in fact, I mean, Ukrainians experienced different states often at the same time and different political systems. Ukrainian historical experience of multiculturalism, multinationalism, like in cities like Lviv, Odessa, and so on. We haven't talked that much about that, but I think that is an extremely important perspective also on Ukrainian historical experience. And this idea, or this idea of Ukraine as a multi-ethnic place might, at a certain point, work as a counterpart to sort of really nationally focused approach to Ukrainian history. So I also think I can imagine that it is extremely hard in times of war, but still I think it's a legacy of Ukrainian history which should be introduced in our debates. So I think, Benjamin, you came up with a very basic assessment that our job is putting the history of Ukraine prominently on the agenda of research and teaching. And actually, I have nothing to add to that and would really agree that I see that as our job. And for me, that became very clear in our discussion. So thank you very much.
And I want to continue. I will be very briefly, because our idea was also to give you the opportunity to say a couple of words, to share your vision, how you like this event. And as for me, I was it's the first time I was very skeptical about this two fields of study. How can we talk about peace and conflict studies and Ukrainian studies in one event? And as for me, I'm pretty shocked, to be honest. I recognized how close this field of studies are, and I'm very glad that we have this discussion dedicated to the third panel. And Father Butich, she started her first point was that Ukrainians were not visible before 2022, and I agree with Professor Karlstruve that Ukraine was not ignored, to be honest, after 2015. Yes, we have in Germany, we have German-Ukrainian Historical Commission And some of you, actually, a lot of people here in this audience wrote books about Ukraine, dedicated to Ukrainian history. But are we talking about academical bubble, or are we talking about German society? I tell everyone the story, and I will tell you the story again. My sister came to Germany in March 2022, and one German woman helped her a lot with documents, with furniture, with apartment. And then this German woman asked my sister, "Do you also wear jeans in Ukraine?" And so, from my point of view, from my perspective, yes, the role of public debates in Germany, public debates dedicated to Ukraine, is also to tell German societies that yes, Ukrainians also wear jeans. But from other side, and Stefan Dobert, he asked very good question. Yes, so he had very good points. Experts have to do something. Experts have to speak and have to act. But why? And what I missed in our discussion, we didn't talk about political life. We didn't talk about impact of public discussion to German political life. And but impact is there. Yes, politicians, their vision of Ukraine, their vision of Eastern Europe, based also of public debates and also of your opinions. All of you, all of these people in this room. Germans outside this room, most of them, they don't understand Ukraine as much as you are here. And I encourage all of you to be active in public debates, to talk, because Francisco Davis, she mentioned that very interesting point, have enough expertise to talk. All of you have, believe me, yes, you have, all of you. And I encourage you to talk, because if you will not talk, other people will do. Yes, other people, Russian, pro-Russian activists, people who have salary from Moscow, and they will talk instead of you. I also feel the lack. Yesterday we talked about it a little bit. Professor Schenk mentioned that this is what targeting Western society. Yes, and I absolutely agree with you. But if so, what is the victory for Germany? Yes, so I understand what is the victory for Ukraine, but what is the victory for Germany? What is the victory for German society? And do you, in public debates, do you suggest the vision of victory? If you suggest what kind of vision of what is the victory for Germany? Yes, for German society, and so I encourage you to speak and to suggest vision. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Okay. Now you put me between you and dinner, which is a very uncomfortable situation. I don't know. I think I got. I didn't understand my job here correctly. I guess because I was.
You could summarize all of that.
Yeah, no, that's beyond my capacity. But I think I'm not going to comment panel 4, which we just had. In which I just shared, and I guess you still have the impressions in your mind. So if you still have some air, I would rather like to say a few words, also as being like a functionary in this peace and conflict studies community in Germany, as the chairman of the German peace of the German Foundation on Peace Research. I rather, and I may go back to some things which has been discussed in panel 4 and panel 2 as well, and basically were schemes which were running throughout the whole day, and this relates more to this intersection of peace and conflict studies research on the one hand and Eastern European area studies on the other hand. But of course, I'm addressing this more from the peace and conflict studies angle. because I'm much more competent in this. And also it goes back in a way to some of the debate we had at the earlier in the morning about what we didn't see and why. And so in a way, the two communities which overlap to some extent, of course, we are now again linked together because of Ukraine and because of the war, basically the war since 2014, of course. But this relationship, in a way, for me, from my analysis, is, I think, shaped by three aspects I would like to highlight. The first is the three aspects I call: first, the missing link; second, the blind spot; and third, the missing opportunities. And the missing link is what I said earlier this morning in my remark, is when we look at the development of peace and conflict studies in Germany, but also I would say in general in the West, it has very much, when it comes to research on armed conflicts, it was very much along this Civil War paradigm. So the problem is not so much how we conceptualize peace. This is also maybe a problem, yeah. But the problem also here is also how we conceptualize war. And of course, that was also for good reason. It was not that this was just a foolish idea of all these peace researchers and conflict researchers to focus on interstate conflicts. That was simply because this was the reality on the ground. This is the empirics. The conflict data, the war statistics showed us a steady decline of interstate wars. This was simply a dying breed, interstate wars after post-45 and after 1990, declining steadily, very, very small numbers, while we have a sharp increase of armed interstate conflicts already in, during the Cold War, but then also after the Cold War, we saw high peaks here, in particular outside of the EU Europe. Yeah, not outside of Europe, but outside of the EU Europe. And so peace and conflict research invested heavily in the research on this phenomenon, which has been also actually overlooked during the Cold War period to some extent. And some of these civil wars, very old, long-standing civil wars, have always been seen through the lens of the Cold War, and they have been portrayed as proxy conflicts, as proxy wars, which was completely misunderstanding, actually, of some of these wars, actually, of these regional wars. And in order to heal that wound, German, and particularly the German, but also, I would say generally in the West, peace and conflict research was investing in this field, in particular with regard to non-European regions, the West Balkan and the South Caucasus being the two exceptions. But the general thrust was very much outside of this continent, and I think over 20 years we did that. And in a way, this maybe also led to some of the strange analysis which you could have read in 2014 about the Donbas war, because many of the colleagues, they saw this primarily as a civil war. Maybe a civil war where Russia is supporting the separatists, so it was also, could also read, it's a separatist war. Yeah, maybe backed by Russia in a way, and so on. Despite the fact that actually it was a full-scale interstate war already, at least at early summer 2014. So it was, I think, there what was clear, it is a full-scale interstate war. Nevertheless, and so this full-scale invasion which we are now seeing. So what we are seeing now is an interstate war. But this is also an interstate war of a very specific kind. It's not, I mean, we have seen interstate wars in the past, of course, and I mean, they are still with us, even if they are small in number. But this war of aggression and annexation is a very specific kind of interstate war. And so for peace and conflict research, we have a problem of small n. Luckily, we have a problem of small n here. Yeah. And this makes it very difficult to say, okay, we invest heavily in this type of war because we never know, maybe it comes up again. There are hardly points of references for this type of war. Maybe the last point of reference you could say was the annexation of Kuwait by Iraq. Yeah. annexation of an entire state and then making it the 19th province of Iraq, full stop. Yeah. So in a way, this is a war scenario which has not been on the mind map of peace and conflict research, I would say. Yeah, it has not been part of the setting kind of armed conflicts we were thinking of and looking at. Secondly, the blind spot. I have already said that the focus shifted very much outside of Europe, and this meant that Eastern Europe and so what has been called the post-Soviet, better don't use this term, but the post-Soviet region became largely overlooked and neglected, which has, I think, emphasized by many of you before, because the research capacities were more located on other regions of the world, where in German research, peace and conflict research in particular, was the feeling we have for a long time neglected too much these other regions in the world, the global south regions. We have neglected them, so we should now invest more in this. And this is what's happening. So you see a change of personnel, you see a change of projects. We saw this in our funding organization, what kind of projects we get in. And there was hardly anything over the past years, when I think back, what we have funded from the just for our small foundation, there was hardly anything which was really related to Eastern Europe. Very few, I mean, if any, yeah. Before 2014, but even after 2014, there was also very limited, simply because people were working on other regions, not only on armed conflicts, but generally on issues in other regions. And the only expertise which was left for a longer time was expertise on Russia's security and foreign policy. So because Russia is still important as an actor when it comes to international security policy, when it comes to disarmament, arms control, this kind of international regimes. So this kind of expertise was still there. If you look at the institutes in Germany, so look at the Hamburg Institute, for instance, so there was still some people working on this. This was still left. Whereas the expertise which was there when people were working on the West Balkan, the South Caucasus, and so on, this vanished actually more and more because these regions, these sub-regions, became part of European studies. The closer these, in particular West Balkan, became like a candidate, get a candidate status, the more it became part of scholars of European studies. They were focusing on that EU enlargement process, EU neighborhood policy, and so on. Yeah? And so it was no longer an issue. Yeah, why should peace and conflict studies, deal with that? So this is a blind spot, which I think there is a change here, but it of course takes time, needs time again. The missing opportunity, my last point, the third point, is, and this is puzzling for myself, and if I look back at numerous conferences within the peace and conflict studies community, in particular our yearly conference we do, for years there has been a talk on the post-colonial turn in peace and conflict studies. This is a huge issue, and the notion of post-colonialism is, as you know, means a lot of rather different things, I would say. It refers to decolonization, it refers to recolonization, it also refers to the post-colonial legacy of colonialism, so there can be different things. But this was simply mainly discussed with focus on non-European regions again, and on the legacies of the European overseas imperialism. This was not applied to European land empires, not just, in particular the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire. So the long shadow of imperialism in Eastern Europe has also been totally neglected in this debate about the post-colonial turn. Yeah? So this I would see as a missed opportunity, because actually the conceptual and the theoretical development in this area is there, but it has not been this region has not been not part of the analysis here. Quite on the contrary, I would say that also within peace and conflict research, you still have colleagues, papers which still play a lot with this geopoliticization of Ukraine. So using all these stereotypes, Tatiana was alluding to in the second panel. I could have even added a few more of these stereotypes, which deny Ukrainian agency. So this was still also somehow a bit of a talk within this community. So the Ukraine as somehow the space in between, the cordon sanitaire, which was more like the security and geostrategic perspective of so Ukraine as buffer zone, Ukraine as a transit space, also Ukraine simply as an infrastructure for pipelines, or Ukraine as a space where a lot of foreign powers use this for history of politics, but is a space with no history of its own. So these kind of geopoliticizations, playing around with these geostereotypes, was not really analyzed, but it was so obvious, but it was not really analyzed by peace and conflict studies, despite the fact that we already have developed the terminology, the language, the concepts for all that. And we did not use this in order to counter these still, and here this is what has been discussed in the third panel, to counter these very dominant geostereotypes, which are still very dominant in the German public debate. And I was struck when I encountered these stereotypes in 2014, and I was even more struck when this came all again after February 22, when we had virtually, and I think Franziska Davis alerted to this, when we basically had the same debate again. The same arguments came up again, which we already heard when we had the Crimea annexation, when we had the Donbas war. The same stereotypes came back. And here, peace and conflict studies, I mean, with all its instruments, with all its theories, should have jumped in and, put its feet in the door and say, stop, now. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And this was, I think, a really largely missed opportunity between 2014 and 22. And so this would be my 3 points on this. So what would follow from this, if I take this last 30 seconds, we not only need to rethink about peace and its meaning. I think this is still an ongoing struggle within peace and conflict research anyhow, but also about war and the different kinds of war and their interrelations. Because I think the Donbas war is an interesting case here. I mean, interesting from an analytical point of view. Interesting case here that is really this kind of hybridity of different types of wars, which come together here, which I think needs to be more in the focus. In future, we see this also in other areas in the world, Mali, Syria, and so on. Second, the peace and conflict research needs to return to Eastern Europe, and also not only on Ukraine, but also on Georgia, Belarus, and others. And we need to apply the post-colonial term finally to our own European land empires and their legacy until today. Thank you very much.
Some time for discussion, and we can also continue over dinner. But if you allow this, I wanted to ask, I just take the freedom and ask a question to Ulrich. To what extent is this what you said, your own opinion? To what extent is this shared in your field? To what extent is it shared knowledge?
First of all, it's my own opinion and my own assessment in a way, as somebody who is now being in this field for some time. I think some points, I guess, would be shared. Maybe the last point is maybe more disputed, because I think there is still a very much an understanding that this post-colonial, because most of the post-colonial literature comes from the Global South itself, from authors from the Global South, or from authors who originally come from the Global South, now work in Oxford, and then tell the world about post-colonialism. I mean, this is the kind of normal pattern in a way, and so in a way it's difficult. I mean, that there is still this understanding that actually we have to see Russia and the Soviet Union and the Russian, the historic Russian Empire also as something which should be analyzed with these instruments and with these concepts and so on. I think this is something which is, I guess, still an open issue. Also because people got confused. I would not. This is a minority within the community, but in the public, it's not. It's more visible that people got confused. That the Kremlin for years has always had this kind of anti-colonial rhetoric when it came to the global South. So in a way, they occupied this anti-colonial language, and they still do so now for allying with the global South. They fight, for them. I mean, it's crazy as it is, but they fight in Ukraine now for the global South in order to defeat U.S. imperialism and so on. Yeah, and this is a narrative which is not. I would not say that it's shared by colleagues. No, don't get me wrong. But it's shared by some, groups in the wider public and also in particular left-wing movements. And so this makes it difficult to have this discussion maybe also within our own community.
Yes, I have got a rather self-critical idea or question to all of us in a way. If perhaps we criticize this, notion of Ukraine as a transitionary borderland, as a transit country and so on, not an agency in itself. And sometimes I think perhaps we were mistaken, because I did some studies on transnational history of Ukraine. Perhaps we even, in doing that, we had this stereotype in our head that Ukraine is something especially transitional. Mm-hmm. And I heard many of my, perhaps you can confirm or object, many Ukrainians said to me, I'm fed over with this transnational thing. Please take us as we are and take Ukraine seriously as Ukraine. And this is really a self-critical thing because sometimes when it seems to me that this transnational interest in Ukraine is again something something other, an othering operation. Because when I did field study in Ukraine at the Weserbergland, I discovered the same practices and social identities and so on. So I think let's talk about internal peripheries in Germany and in Ukraine. And that would be interesting. We will be finding many parallels, and Weserbergland is not a very transitionary part of the world, but anyway, we have these practices there. So perhaps this should be incentive even for those who think already they are advanced and they are already having it all and have got it how to speak on Ukraine. We should work on ourselves more than we did.
Thank you for being self-critical. Elena, one more question.
I'm a bit outside of social sciences, so I don't dive in your methodology and everything, but I wanted to ask whether you consider this, because I heard also today comments about that archives are, I think you said it, the archives are open 30 years later, so how come we study contemporary Ukraine? And it sounded a bit different, it's weird for me because you don't need archives to study contemporary Ukraine, of course, you can study because, we live in the digital era, and we also have a lot of Ukrainian media we try in English. So there was a question whether historians or scientists of conflict and peace would consider, in order to understand the contemporary society, whether do you read news about Ukraine, not in Ukrainian, I don't expect it, but written by Ukrainians in English or in German, or you only rely on publications, English publications, and stuff like that. Thank you.
What do our panelists say?
Okay. Anna Veronica, she mentioned today that vision of Ukraine as a troublemaker, and I like this concept very much actually. And yes, I think we still in Germany we have a lot of people have this vision that Ukraine as a country as troublemaker, but often in German media, especially last year, I saw this concept of Ukrainian war. Not Russian war against Ukraine, Russian-Ukrainian war, but Ukrainian war. Ukraine is troublemaker. I think very important for us to explain the situation that not Ukraine is not make troubles. Yes, Russia makes troubles, not Ukraine. And about freedom, I remember in Kiev, in Maidan, there were probably still is, I don't know, there's a big poster. Freedom is our religion. Yes, and so I think. And some people in Germany, as for me, don't understand that Ukrainians, they're not fighting for peace, they're fighting for freedom. And freedom is more important than peace. Yes? And we talk about it today, this cemetery piece. Yes, the concept of freedom is crucial for Ukraine, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you.
Actually, as I told, I'm a pre-modern historian, but recently, because of the lack of voices, I was invited in several Volkshochschule meetings and faced them. It was very difficult to make questions, and actually facing that most of actually I separated them into two main questions of Russian literature. Whose fault is it, and what is to do now? And actually, this question, whose fault is it, is everything clear? More or less, yes. People are pretty aware about Khrushchev. Someone, either Khrushchev or Gorbachev, they are mixing up two names, granted Crimea to Ukraine. And this is the point
when they were drunk. When they were drunk.
Something like this. And this is the time point when the trouble started. But what is this with the second question? What is to do now? Actually, it's very difficult and very irritating also to me question. And personally, I also don't know the answer. And hopefully, when I think that bringing together these fields of study, East European studies and Eastern conflict studies, we approaching that time point when this question, what is to do now, will appear on the pages of Ukrainian medias and of Ukrainian narratives, because of course it's very important Ukraine to win, but it's also very important that the question about peacemaking and the question about the future picture of the world will appear also in Ukrainian narratives. So that's why I'm pleading really for deeper cooperation, and I think that this event, this symposium, shows that it's very fruitful to bring together such different fields of studies and to relax and change our ideas.
Yeah, I agree, in particular with the last point, and I hope that this whole conference is just a starting point maybe for bringing peace and conflict studies on the one hand and Eastern European or area expertise in the wider sense together, and I can only encourage to do so. And maybe to the question, of course, in my personal work, I would never call myself somehow an expert on Ukraine or on Eastern Europe or whatever, simply because of the lack of training and the lack of language skills and so on. However, I think it, from an international relations point of view, social science point of view, of course, there are still opportunities to do some decent research, of course, but then you have to listen to others, and you have to be open to other communities and also try to figure out who's saying what in these communities. And so, and that was always my idea of doing peace and conflict research, because I'm traveling throughout the world, mentally, sometimes physically. And of course, I have to really study and read a lot about conflicts of people who are much more knowledgeable than I when they deal with Afghanistan or Colombia and so on and so on. And if you're lucky, you read sources, first-hand sources from people. And the same happened with me with regard to Ukraine. In terms of Ukraine, it was for me very important, and so that's why I was more driven into this field in a way. I mean, I was once a student of East European history, I have to admit, but never finished and failed here. And then went the easy way into political science. When I returned to Eastern Europe in 2013-14, inspired because of the Euromaidan, I was happy that I had the chance to travel to Ukraine a few times, organizing also some conferences, or were invited to conferences, and then organizing some summer schools with Ukrainian students and students from Germany and so on. And that helped me a lot. I mean, of course, I still would not say I have huge understanding, but at least I had the feeling I could engage with people and with colleagues and so on, starting a partnership with Chernivtsi University and so on and so on. So different projects, and this helps me in my own, of course, very much in my own research as not being, in this community and so on. So I think this is the way, at least, how I try to approach things, and then of course still everything is limited. But I want to say one last thing is, I was very critical on the peace and conflict studies community, and of course we could not have prevent everything and so on. But of course I'm also saying this because we now got sometimes accused from politicians, from German politicians, and I really get angry then. From German politicians, why has peace and conflict studies not foreseen all that? Why didn't you warn us? Why? And I had one very intense debate on this. This was already after 2014, when somebody said this whole peace and conflict research is completely useless. They have not foreseen Crimea annexation, so why should we further fund these guys? Just shut them down. We can save money. I mean, this was I take them. This was the wording actually, but at the same time, one has to say that, and this relates to the third panel we had on the German public debate. One has to say that this whole development, or this whole dealing with in Germany with the war against Ukraine since 2014 is a complete political elite failure. And it's nothing what the political elites across the board, Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Christian Social Democrats, I leave the Greens and the Liberals a little bit out because I think they had developed a certainly different position here, in particular the Greens. But all these people who have been in executive office on the government level, so Merkel, Steinmeier, on the one hand, and on the Länder level, which is always overlooked. We are here in North Rhine-Westphalia. I work in Lower Saxony, which was one of the worst cases in this regard, next to Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, next to Saxonia, next to Bavaria. And if you have political elites ruling, also on the state level, and also we have the Merkel-Steinmeier approach in regard to Russia policy, which was simply continued after 2014, with some, of course, we had sanctions and there were some reactions and so on. But on the whole, the kind of, paradigm of Germany's Russia politics simply continued. And if you have at the Länder level, you have prime ministers who constantly lobbied against the anti-Russia sanctions, which Germany agreed in Brussels. And then you at the Länder level, you have these people elected, prominent figures. So then you wonder, we have this public debate in Germany. Because the society has not been prepared, has not been told what is actually going on. It has been told, well, these sanctions are bad and we punish ourselves and they don't work anyhow, so we better don't do it, and then we can sell our agricultural goods. That's the Lower Saxony argument, and so on and so on. And so I'm not surprised of having this debate again. No, I'm surprised to some extent, but if you think about it, political elites ruling elites have not been able to capture what's going on after 2014, and no, also not the society.
I see at least two more questions in the audience, but I I'm willing and able to take one more so that we have 3. So if there is someone else who wants to ask one more question, it will be the last. Franziska Davis, Anna Veronica Wendland.
Hopefully dinner is not getting cold now.
No, we have it under control.
Okay.
Yeah, just a comment to what you were saying, and also Yaroslav about shouldn't we be talking about freedom rather than peace? I mean, I do think that is a good idea to communicate more clearly what Ukraine is fighting for, but I'm not sure whether that would help us that much, because there's still this notion in Germany that peace is more important than freedom. Yeah, so I mean that's basically what Egon Bahr said when he defended the imposition of martial law in Poland in 1981. He basically said peace is more important than Poland, which at that time was basically saying peace is more important than freedom. So I think it's that, and it's that also kind of goes back to historical experiences, that this fighting for your freedom, fighting against an enemy which seems super powerful and winning is not an experience that a perpetrator nation in the 20th century Germany has ever had. And it also hasn't had the experience of a genocidal regime. And I think that is perhaps even more important to stress, that what you call peace or frozen conflict is a genocidal occupation of Ukraine where the dying will continue. And to always stress this and also point to the historical experience of World War II, where exactly that happened in Poland and Ukraine, where there were more, the death toll under occupation was higher than the death toll stemming from the direct military confrontation. And then the second point, which I wanted to make in our panel, but I forgot, so I'm just going to do it now. It's just a comment. It's also, unfortunately, quite pessimistic. Because, yes, on one hand, I agree with Kai Struber when we look to the direction toward Ukraine. Then we now have really a much larger interest and much greater, clear understanding, at least in parts of German society, than we had between 2014 and 2022. But one has to say that has nothing to do with experts or us. It has to do with the fact that Germans really noticed Ukraine when Ukrainians started dying in mass numbers for their country. And I mean, that really is a very, it really does say something about German society, which is really quite shocking. But coming back to what you said about political elites, when we now see, and that is also one of the many things that I find worrying, look toward German policies towards China now. You really, I mean, I'm not an expert on China, but the kind of discourse we have on China from political elites reminds me so much of the discourse we had towards Russia. What they're doing to the Uyghurs is not nice. I mean, that's what we heard about Chechnya. Yeah, it's not nice, but and so maybe people have learned about Ukraine, but have we learned to and this not only society but political elites, and at the end of the day, it's extremely important, as Ulrich Schneckener pointed out. They most of them, or many of them, including the Chancellor, do not seem to be able to draw any lessons from the policy failure. And to learn from the experience of Russia with the experience with China. So this is more a comment than a pessimistic, I'm sorry.
Anna Veronica, and
yes, that was precisely the thing I wanted to add when you said there's one exception, that's the Greeks. If you look on our dependency in renewable energy, it's about 80% dependency from China in the field of photovoltaics. So we do the same, we repeat the same mistakes, and we even call this Freiheitsenergie. That is really
but this is an invention from the FDP.
In fact, a social dependency from China. But additionally, it was interesting for me that what you said, the reaction of politicians. So why didn't you warn? The very interesting thing is that there were people who warned, but they were systematically defunded after the 90s. And this was Eastern European studies and Eastern European history. There were people who already in the 90s tried to give attention to the fact that Russia is doing pressure policy with gas contracts and with constant hints on Crimea is Russian and not Ukraine. Constant pressure on Ukraine to deploy the Black Sea fleet another 40 years and so on. So I think there was these warnings, but these warnings were not. There were no incentives to be warned. In a way, the opposite was the case. We got less funding.
Last comment.
Yeah, last comment. I'm Svetlana Boltovska. I'm not historian. I'm a social and cultural anthropologist, and we work together on a special region of Ukraine, Polisia, and it's, I would call it the last jungle of Europe. Mm-hmm. And before Chernobyl, the Soviet Union, the Soviet Academy of Science of Kiev and Minsk, Ukrainian and Belarusian, published two ethnographic standard works. Ethnography of material culture of this Ukrainian Polisia, and a second book about mental and social culture of this area. And the books began with the words, as a forward, European scholars know more about region of Africa and Asia than about this Ukrainian region, which is the last jungle of Europe. And it was not only the problem what you told now, you told us about peace and conflict studies. It began already in the 19th century, and it continues till 21st century. And it was a Soviet standard book, but it's just actual for us. European scholars and German scholars know more about Africa than about some Ukrainian areas and territories. Mm-hmm. And it's also a problem that we have scholars who work on global south, and we have scholars who work on Eastern European studies, yeah? And people who are interested in global south, they don't have any language skills like Russian and Ukrainian. People who are interested here in Germany for Eastern Europe, they have no interest in Africa or Asia. And it's a very big problem that there are no comparative studies between these big
It sounds like an idea for one new conference, please. Last sentence.
Yeah, okay. Sorry for stealing discussion to this topic. So just reacting to the comments on China, I was thinking, I also wanted to remind what Alexander Matvichuk told yesterday in the last comments. He should always stressing out that we should think of us people actually having more, also more subjectivity, not just as Ukraine having, we're talking today about Ukraine having subjectivity, but also we as human beings having subjectivity. And as economists, I come from an economic background, I can say most inefficiencies in economics come from people not being able to evaluate the consequences of their decisions, not just for themselves, but indirectly for the others. So, for example, as I was 10 years old, we have a rules in studio. We don't buy anything from China. So it's very hard to live in 10 years old, all toys in Germany, almost everything is in China. But if one wants, I can change it. I really don't. Thank you very much for this couple. Saying explicitly today that when we choose not to do anything, that's also activism, because our actions do have real consequences for the others. And I think that we might regardless of our background, our profession. Thank you. I don't give the panelists now the opportunity to react. We have to finish because of the soup in the restaurant around the corner. I want to finish with 3 remarks. I think that the 3 motives that you mentioned, Ulrich, might also be complemented by another one, roads not taken, and not only in your field, but also in our field, East European Studies. And the second point is a huge thank you. Thank you to all of you who decided to invest your time and energy to come to Bielefeld. Thank you to all those who registered for this event on site and to the audience online. And thank you also for all many helping hands behind the scenes. Some of them are visible, some are not, but there were many helping hands. Thank you a lot.